So given the overview of the Yuba-Feather FCO decision support system that's currently in use. So just a high-level overview of the Forecast Coordinated Operations Program. The program was developed to foster coordination between the reservoirs in the Yuba-Feather system during high water events to minimize downstream risk of flooding without impacting water supply. Few goals and objectives along that is to reduce the peak flows through coordination and minimize the risk of exceeding channel capacity.
Cale, do you have slides?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm on it a little quicker than with Rob. We're not seeing your slide. There we go. Thank you.
All right. So starting down here, this is my first slide here. But yeah, to reduce peak flows of the rivers and the risk of exceeding channel capacity through improved forecasting, and then the improvement of coordination of releases, notification processes to other agencies, and increase flood warning times. And then I know there was a lot of talk about maintenance of tools and training. With the FCO program, we continue development of the tools and implementation of the tools through functional exercises and trainings. We do an annual exercise every year, pretty much. We present everybody with a synthetic high water event, and everybody, all the users of the system are at their respective offices working through this high water event all at the same time to coordinate and communicate a release strategy for the Yuba-Feather system. So a lot of the graphics I'm going to show today are based off synthetic hydrology from the exercises in the past. All right. So quickly, FCO Partners, I think a lot of people already know this, but Yuba Water Agency and the California Department of Resources both operate Newboards Bar and Oroville, respectively. Oroville through the State Water Project of DWR. The department wears two hats in this sense, as it's also the flood management, flood emergency response component, also with the Division of Flood Management in there. We also have the California Nevada River Forecast Center providing the forecast and their expertise to meteorologic and hydrologic products. And then, of course, anything with flood operations related to reservoirs involves the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So as Rob mentioned before, the design of the FCO system is essential to create that common operating environment for the coordination of reservoir operations in the Yuba-Feather system. So everything is housed in the Data Exchange Center over at DWR, and then all the users can access the DSS through the internet with their user login credentials. So a quick overview of what the DSS is used for. So users can view data such as stream flows, river stages, and reservoir elevations in the DSS. It allows for users to run reservoir simulations and multiple simulations and the resulting effect downstream on flows and downstream stages. I mentioned before, coordination of release schedules, and it's pretty critical in the Yuba-Feather system since, like I mentioned before, both Oroville and Newboards Bar have those common downstream flow targets that they both must meet. And then we can also perform an uncertainty analysis using the ensemble forecast based on the release schedule that users can come up with. So some of the features of the model, we're using HEC resim behind the scenes to do these simulations. In terms of forecast, we're directly ingesting the deterministic forecast and ensemble forecast from the RFC. And the whole system is maintained by the California Data Exchange Center at DWR. The boundary conditions and model points are based on the water control manuals, so we are very water control manual centric. And that includes, for the downstream modeling points, the 180-120 split between the Feather River at Yuba City and the Yuba River at Marysville. We also have the 300,000 CFS target flow below the confluence of the Yuba River and the Feather. And then we have the 320,000 CFS target downstream of the Bear River, typically what we refer to as the Feather River near Nicholas. Here is a graphic representation of the boundary conditions. Everywhere you see a hydrograph is a forecast input into the model. So we have both Oroville and New Bullard's Bar inflows, and then we have all the local contributions within the system to be considered. One unique thing about the FCO local flows is we're using lump locals from the RFC. So it incorporates all the contribution from, like, in terms of Englebright, the middle and south fork of the Yuba, in addition to the local contribution into that Englebright subbasin. Likewise with Marysville, it's the local contribution between Englebright and Marysville. And the same thing for the Yuba local, that's the local contribution from Oroville to Yuba City. And as mentioned before, our simulated flow points of interest are the Feather River at Yuba City, Yuba River at Marysville, the Feather Yuba Junction or the confluence, and then downstream here is the Feather River at Nicholas. So with the FCO, we have a two-phased approach. The first phase is to create a release schedule off the deterministic forecast from the C in RFC. And then the second phase is to perform an uncertainty analysis based on that determined release strategy. So first we'll start at phase one and focus on that. But like I mentioned, we take the deterministic forecast, we route it through the RESIM model. We do have a result that is presented to the operators that is strictly by the rules of the water control manual and the forecast. So we have a resulting outflow schedule or release strategy. Operators can then have their own expertise and tweaks and refinements to their release schedule and coordinate with the other agencies within the system. And can see the resulting downstream flows in the system with those coordinated releases. And here it kind of goes back and forth. This can become an iterative process as additional refinements and coordination is done as both operators come to a convergence on a solution or convergence on it. Don't want to say optimal release schedule, but a release schedule that satisfies the requirements of the water control manual. So this is the front page of the FCO DSS. I'll explain the table here. So the red column here is the candidate release schedule. This is that release schedule that comes directly from ResSim. that is strictly based on the water control manual and the forecast. Users aren't able to change or manipulate this column, and that's automatically presented to the operators when they first log in. The blue column here is the projected column. This column is used for system-wide coordination when operators are ready to do that. And this column is available for everybody to see. But most of the work is done here in the alternative column. That's the green column. This is a user-specific release schedule. It's not available for everybody to see. We call it the user sandbox, and this is where users can work through refining their release schedule or release strategy and seeing what the resulting impacts are on the reservoir and downstream. And then, of course, there's a graphical representation of the table too, that's on the left. Here's an example of a deterministic result when an operator or user submits release through a simulation. So this is a typical reservoir plot. This is Oroville showing here. So I'll work. So the line down the middle of the screen is T0 or now, the time of forecast. Everything to the left of that black line is observed, and then everything to the right is either simulated or forecasted results. At the top here, since Oroville has a dynamic topic conservation based on a wetness index, we have that represented here. The wetness index is represented in purple, and then the precipitation, the feather basin precipitation, is represented in the kind of the green color here. Again, for the Feather River precipitation, we're using observed on this side, but we're also forecasting future conditions for topic conservation. So we're using a forecast out of the CNRC for that precipitation to calculate future topicon or wetness index. Excuse me. So that's being represented here. And then in the middle pane here, we have the red, blue, and green is the corresponding release strategies that were represented in the table in the previous slide. And then the kind of blue line here with the squares is the forecasted inflow into the reservoir from the RFC. So based on these release schedules here, ResSim outputs the simulated storage based on those releases, and that's represented down here. So you can see based on this release that in this scenario, this is the resulting outcome for storage.
Cale, I just wanted to give you a 2-minute warning.
Okay. All right. And then downstream, we have the points of interest. We have the junction and Nicholas, and we include danger stage, flood stage, and everything else there for users to see. So moving through the uncertainty analysis. So once users are happy with their releases, they can run it through an uncertainty analysis. So we take the ensemble forecast and run each of the traces with that release schedule and come up with a frequency of exceeding certain critical stages. So we're using the ensemble forecast out of the RFC. For the sake of time, I'll go through that. So we represent the ensemble results as box and whisper plots and overlay that with the deterministic forecast. So operators or users can see where that distribution lands relative to critical threshold Likewise, down here with the releases, even though we're holding the release steady or static, sometimes some ensemble traces may drive the pool higher and you may not be able to hold that release. You may be going over the dam or ungated spillway. So a REFM will actually capture that. So breakout of the box and whisker plots, we have the whiskers are the max and min, and then we have the 95% non-exceedance and the 5% non-exceedance, and then the median for the pool elevation. And then we have similar plot for downstream with box and whiskers. And so we can see the level of exceedances there. We also have a table that summarizes the results. So we have the different locations of interest with their thresholds, and then different time durations. And then you can see, users can see, say, in this case, 48 hours out, we have 6 ensemble traces exceeding the 120 CFS threshold, which is about 10% of the ensemble. But then when we move over to the 72-hour period, you can actually see that like 61 traces now exceed the 120 CFS threshold, and we actually have one that exceeds the 180 split. So, and that runs out through the end of the forecast period, which is 5 days. Once users, or I should say reservoir operators, are happy with their releases, they submit those releases, and then that gets shipped over to the CNRFC to be incorporated into the next issuance of the forecast, which is pretty important in communicating out to the general public. The Weather Service is also responsible for not necessarily the RFC, but the Sacramento Weather Forecast Office will put out flood warnings and watches and advisories to the general public based on those forecasts. So that's one way we extend lead times for notices and flood watches. And that conclusion of my presentation.